Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Seeking Harmony conversation series. Today, we are looking at some of the newsworthy items we've come across in this past week or so. And so, yeah, I think one of the things that's really stood out as, for me specifically, has been this nuclear threat from the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. And so it's quite interesting that this progression of the war between Russia and Ukraine has gotten to the point where it's starting to be reminiscent of threats that were made during the Cold War. And so that's something that came up through the topics about the articles we reviewed. But it's also something that begs the question once again about where the world is going in terms of this acceptance or even just this resistance to the energy of war and the energy of annexing other countries and things like that. So one of the things that stood out for me and that kind of jogged in my memory was when this war initially started, one of the one of the topical components of it was Vladimir Putin's physical and mental well-being. And I mean, given that we're 9 months down the line, between 6 and 9 months down the line, it's something that kind of just cropped up in my mind to say, well, you know, he is at the point where the Russian forces are actually losing ground, and there is behavior that's requiring a little bit more aggression on his part, to be perfectly honest. And that is seen through one of the topics that we discussed, I think it was last week or the week before, around some of the changes in Russia in terms of mobilization, in terms of conscripting people to join the military, in terms of relaxing residence requirements for people serving in the army, for foreign people serving in the army. So I feel like there's a lot pointing to a situation that could turn even more dangerous, in the sense that it seems to me like he's being backed into a corner more and more. And so the sanctions have been greater. There's a greater direct response in terms of his nuclear threats. There's more publicity around his own country not supporting this movement, this war effort. And so it feels like there's a sense of being backed into a corner. And generally, for me, the sense of being backed into a corner necessitates probably some very dangerous behavior in order to be taken seriously again. And for somebody to be tabling a nuclear threat, it also cannot continue. It can't continue into perpetuity, because at some point you lose the value of the threat. So at some point he's going to need to act one way or the other. So that's something that really stood out for me, and I want to open it up to the team and see how you feel about what we've been reading about it and what could potentially be his stance and his response, and even just potential thought process, given that we are human beings, that we are having a human experience, and so we have gone through situations individually or even as citizens of countries where there has been the instances of being backed into a corner, which generally results in much more dangerous, much more risque, much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Much more almost, let me just find this word.
Reckless?
Much more, thank you, much more reckless behavior. And so, yes, he's the head of a state, he's a head of state, but at the same time, he's got to be seen to have power, to have teeth. So the bark has to be followed through by some type of bite. So yeah, I just want to see how you guys feel about that.
Well, I have felt and I feel that his threats, it seems like his threats are largely not serious in terms of nuclear capabilities, even though he's very unstable and dictator and he's feeling threatened. It feels like this is more saying like, I want you, the rest of the world, to be afraid and to give in to me. And I want you to think that things are going to get really bad, but I don't necessarily want to like go that far as doing nuclear strikes because of any kind, because like the consequences would be so bad for that too, even then. And another thing I was wondering too is that like if Vladimir Putin would even like have the authority. I mean, I don't think that he has the sole authority to like launch an attack like that. Although I know that there have been reports that he's been like directly communicating with his generals and things like that. It kind of reminds me though of like the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the 60s when supposedly what I heard was that like the Soviet Union was saying to launch a nuclear weapon at the US, and the actual guy responsible for doing that, Vasily Arkhipov, was like, no, let's not do that, and prevented that. So I think that also is a factor, but I'm not sure what you guys know or think or feel about that and everything what I said, because I don't know. Yeah.
I am pretty much agreeing with you. I'm just wondering, like, is he the one that talked about nuclear first, or was it like something that the media kind of fell upon because he said he would be more serious in like his declaration of war? Because it doesn't feel to me that he was the first to address nuclear weapons. And so that would mean that his purpose and what I feel in the exchanges that we've seen this week is like more like to inspire fear or to like try to calm down the threat on the Western side. So it's more reminiscent to me to the Cold War and actually like Cuba's missile crisis than like beginning of an actual physical war or like World War III. And I think Jeff and Shaleia were talking about that in one of our classes about the Cuban crisis actually. And they said like, much like we're saying a lot of the time, was that the world was not actually choosing to have such a threat as nuclear weapons being used back in 1962. And I don't feel like the world is choosing that either today. So I'm pretty much agreeing with you on the part where it feels like he's going to, obviously, like I'm kind of agreeing with like I feel like everyone in this thing has a little bit of a truth. It's like he's getting desperate and so making threats. But also I feel like it's much like everything that it does, it's a lot of communication and appearances. Like the way he appeared when he announced the annexation was so much like staged. Like we don't know like if the government bought people to kind of like go to this meeting. We don't know anything about it. Actually, I don't think like the average Russian person is like celebrating any kind of victory in the annexation of Ukraine. And so, yeah, it also feel like just because he's getting desperate doesn't mean that he's going like to act upon this threat, like the nuclear threat. And I feel like that's something that people would jump into when saying like, oh, like it's an actual war, so he's going to use it. Much like any dictator that has been kind of showing off their weapon in the past few years. But it doesn't feel, and maybe I might be wrong, but it doesn't feel like at the core, like humanity is choosing that. And yeah, and as you said, like the guy that was responsible to launch the missile, like actually the Soviet Union wanted to launch that on a miscommunication that the Americans wanted to do it as well. And it was actually not the case. And so it was God in that person saying, no, let's not destroy half the world by launching the missile at this time. And yeah, because like I have so many parallels in my mind of like, and I think you're thinking that too, Sage, about like the Cuban situation. I feel like it's more of a kind of Cold War energy at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. When I like really feel into the situation, and I've just been sitting here, asking like what is God's truth for this of this situation? It feels like he's just grasping. He's really grasping and he's losing, and he feels that he's losing and losing power, and but I do feel that it does feel like he wouldn't actually, at least right now, go through with the nuclear threat. I think he would want to see if his troops that he's been calling forth, which has not been successful, but would be able to do anything, which they're already losing, though, which we've seen in like the last, like yesterday, we just saw that Ukraine has made even more advances. But yeah, I agree with you guys. It doesn't feel like he would follow through with it, just at least not yet. But I can't lie that it doesn't make me scared. I do feel afraid of it though, but it doesn't feel like it is there. But yeah.
I was thinking, like, what if he's playing his recklessness as a communication tool to make people feel that, like, question, like, would he actually do it? How far would he go? Because, like, I don't think he's a dumb leader. I think he knows, like, the kind of fear he inspires, whether he wins or loses. And maybe it's using it to his advantage because like the appearance of communication is like everything to the Russian government. So, and we've seen in the past, I think we've already said that like a few months ago in the discussion, like he would be willing to do anything on any front just to make it seem like he wins or he has control over the situation. And that passes through like maybe physical action, but also very much like digital presence. Grenville, how are you feeling?
Yeah, so I'm listening to you guys, and I'm still not certain that I necessarily agree with that, and for the reason that we didn't think it would have lasted this long in the first place. We also didn't think that he would have acted in initiating this war the way he has. We didn't think that Europe would be suffering from a shortage of gas, which is used to make electricity as well. There's a lot of things that we felt the collective was saying no to, but that the collective is suffering through. And so I don't personally feel like it is smart to underestimate a caged or a cornered animal, to be perfectly honest. And yes, it might not go as far as what we read in terms of intercontinental ballistic missiles, but there are other forms of nuclear weaponry that have a much more limited range that would not necessarily impact countries in a greater radius. And so even a small play with one of those kind of weapons is very likely if the Ukrainian forces continue to make the gains that they do. And yes, it might be tabling a threat as a deterrent for anybody else to get further involved in kind of mitigating the war between these two countries. But at the same time, a threat without follow-through would, in essence, render him toothless. And I am not certain that we will see a toothless Putin very soon.
Right. Yeah. I just yeah. I know the media, like I wasn't thinking that, like what Irene was saying about that the media brought up the threat of nuclear attacks, I guess, before Vladimir Putin even did. Maybe they did bring it up first. I know that they tend to mention it, that a country is like nuclear armed no matter what. Like if there's like a conflict going on, the media will mention like it's a nuclear armed country. And it's like, I feel like the media like wants to sell that story of like this really scary thing, and because they feel like that whole thing, that the drama of it is going to sell, and they want to push it and sell it, and that's why I'm hesitant to say that like his use of nuclear weapons is likely. But I know what you're saying though about like someone who's cornered and who's like really mentally unstable on top of it. And so I know exactly what you're saying, but I feel like the US is like matching that energy, although not the threat, because they wouldn't respond with any type of nuclear weapons. But the US is trying to match that threat by saying like, if you use any sort of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, then we will like destroy the Russian army, in Ukraine, in like Ukrainian waters and lands, right? So that brings a whole new element to it, though, because now the US has been saying that they would get directly involved too if that happens. So I'm like, well, where would that take us? And is the US kind of like bluffing here? Or are they just, you know what I mean? It's like a game of like deterrence, you know? Like during the Cold War, they're like, that was how it was. And if that scenario actually played out in the Cold War, it would have been really bad. And it never did play out. So I'm wondering if this is similar or what you feel, you know?
So one of my senses is, yes, there's a similarity to the Cold War, but then there's also the significant changes that have happened since the Cold War, in that quite a few countries chose to, for lack of a better phrasing, denuclearize themselves. So we know, for instance, that there's been lots of programs run in terms of breaking down nuclear components and using it to fuel power stations and those kind of things. But also in the background, something that pops up is that for years we've heard that Russia has also stockpiled nuclear weapons. And whether we can know for certain whether that's true or not is probably the biggest question mark under these circumstances. Because again, let's be honest, we've heard significant stories about Vladimir Putin's physical and mental health and his instability. And nothing of that has been as popular in the media over even the last 3 months. Yet in the beginning of the war, it was lots of conversation about mental health, stability. The mental health of leaders came up as one of our topics because it all of a sudden became prevalent that was being reported in the news. So like, I get it, like, you know, I feel like it is sitting on almost a blade's edge, a very precarious balance here. I agree with you that it wouldn't be smart of him to act in this war using nuclear weapons, given the very direct response from the US and NATO saying we will then get directly involved. But at the same time, we cannot offhand discount that Russia, under the leadership of Putin, might act in that direction. And in all honesty, most of our conversations have been about his display of wanting to show power. So whether it's staged, whether the threat is the next piece in his propaganda warfare, the fact of the matter is, it is on the table now. Where it surfaced, we can't say, but we do have two very strong forces now saying, well, I can, but you don't know what I have. And then you have another force saying, well, if you do, we will also act. And those are the major players. And then you have this other major physical player in terms of Ukraine pushing and making advances. At some point, there's either a very forced peace agreement or there's a renewal of the warfare.
Well, I'm just like asking myself, what's the core of this? And right now, even though yes is a very dangerous player, Putin, I still have to say that the feeling of the core of it is still balancing towards peace, which is the core choice of like most of the world. So definitely the core choice of consciousness then. And in terms of like, the civil war and how true the threats were of like responding back to each other, I feel like there is a bit of bluffing, like not really bluffing, but communication, definitely, like showing who's the strongest. But I do feel like there were still investments, enough investments that countries would be prepared if the threats ever became real. And so I think like a country or a peace organization is never really bluffing about like having at least in the Western world, but I think in general never really bluffing about having like the power to respond. But just like obviously hoping that it's not gonna end in a war, which is like what most people hope for. And yeah, that's that. And I just keep having in my heart like this conversation that we had with Jeff at one point, asking like, well, what do you think dictators actually want? Isn't what they're doing a version of what they consider peace? And so in terms of like, what do Putin actually want? Like we have to question ourselves. I don't think we have the answers quite yet, but we have to question ourselves on like, what is it that he actually wants and what is he ready to do to have that version of what it desires. And so my response to my own question right now is I don't know.
But
I really
also
don't
another
know.
thing that would be a good question to ask would be, what is he not prepared to give up to get what he wants?
Yeah.
What is he not prepared to give up?
Yeah, what is he not prepared to actually sacrifice or give up or lose in order to have his version of peace?
Yeah, I guess broadly speaking, or in whatever scenario, well, he obviously wouldn't want to give up the support of the Russian people, or at least those closest to him first, because if he were so opposed that he were like unseated from power, I just think that he just really, really doesn't want that. And the more, if Russians perceive that his actions, if they lead to like a really, really bad response and bad consequences for Russia, then even if like what he's doing would be helping him like quote unquote win the war, he will have lost the war at home, which is, trying to like not win over, but like try to keep a hold on people, not chasing him out of office.
Yeah.
That's what I feel about it, because I think that might be more of an issue for him. I don't know.
I agree. Like the first thing I was thinking was that he actually is not ready to lose the Russian people, even if he's not very good right now at internal politics. I don't think is ready to lose like his people in that way. It's in that sense is slightly different from China, I feel, where China is more about like a controlling of his people, of like the benefit of the whole, with like huge sacrifices from its people, especially financially. and in the workplace, I don't think he's making a choice quite that similar, especially because Russian people are very much like, they have their own like ideal of what they would like and what they would not like to do and what not to touch. So yeah.
I'm not so certain I agree with you. So my concern here is when you say he's not prepared to lose his people, I'm saying, well, the entire war has been about sacrificing his people for a gain. You know,
Yeah.
and I mean, I'm very simplistically calling it that, but the fact of the matter is, his people went into war. His military machine went into war for reasons we still don't quite fully understand. So we're trying to find the truth of it, and we understand that there's a very almost egomaniacal component to his personality that says, I want to reestablish imperialist Russia. And this belonged to us before, and it should continue to belong to us. And the fact that it doesn't belong to us anymore is actually nobody else in the world's business but Russia and the countries surrounding it. And not even all of the countries surrounding it. So I'm a little bit concerned. I agree with all of you that collectively, not a single person is saying, yes, go to war, or choosing war to that extent. Yes, there may be some strong supporters, but the majority would definitely not want for our way of life, for humanity to deteriorate into the level of nuclear warfare that could ensue. But at the same time, we also need to remember that sacrifices have already been made. Losses have already happened. There's the mobilization of a greater component of the Russian population in order to continue supporting the war effort. So I'm not certain that Putin is concerned about losing his people. In fact, I'm also on the page of, he has a very imperialist view that the people are his instrument. And so he use them at his disposal and will the way he chooses to. And yes, there might be clash, there might be resistance, but for as long as he is in his mind almost a type of monarch in the Russian political circle, in the Russian political landscape, is also given the strength of Russia as a country. Russia, and we spoke about this in the Discord chat more than anything else, was Russia getting involved in very many other conflicts over the years. There is definitely still a sense that Russia has strength. And so you have a person who perceives himself as the emperor of the new USSR. You have his will to use his people as pawns in a war that they didn't even know they were going into. There's a sense that he is not as stable as what would be in the best interests of his people or the world. I'm saying, do not underestimate that a cobra in a corner is a more dangerous cobra.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think it is wise for people to be prepared for stuff like that. I did, like, for example, like I was seeing that in Kiev, they were distributing like the little tablets you take, the potassium iodide tablets, to combat the effects of radiation. You know, like if he used like a low yield nuclear weapon, or like, you know what I mean? Or kind of like a radioactive laced weapon. And I think it's wise to be prepared there. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, yeah, we've just seen so much throughout the conflict how like he has wanted to project all these images of like Russia, for example, of like Russia being strong, or an image of the war going well, or an image of how bad things are going to be, or how fast the war is going to go. And all that image has just fallen right over, like it's like a cardboard cutout, you know? So, you know what I mean? So that's why I would be skeptical of any of his threats, but I totally know what you mean. And this is a really extraordinary time. And during the Cold War, there was never a leader who was as embattled as Putin was. I don't feel like any of the Soviet leaders were ever like embattled, you know, in their own country. Whereas with him, I think in terms of, I guess what I would mean to say in terms of keeping his people would be preventing an all-out large-scale rebellion like they're seeing in Iran. I don't mean keeping them as like they like actively support. I mean keeping as in like they're too unwilling or intimidated to like rise up on a massive level enough to unseat him. Yeah. Because I don't think that he has won hearts and minds. I think he's lost them, if he did have them ever. Yeah. So yeah.
I do think it's gatekeeping as well, like keeping rebellion at arm's length. And what I mean is that the military of the world right now is more instrument than people, more than ever before. So, and Russia is quite a large country, so I wonder, even if his military numbers were greater at first than Ukraine, like I feel it's still in the sense of like how the military is constructed today, I still feel like it's a little percentage of the people. And even with the drafting that he was hoping to have, I still would feel like it would be a small percentage of the people. So I feel it's still part of like gatekeeping people, like giving them enough freedom so that they don't like cause a rebellion, because it's still 2022 and people are more expressive about their opinions than ever, even in countries where we see freedom being questioned again and again. And so yeah, that's just my feeling, but I feel it's not as black and white, obviously, as discussing that, yeah, no, threats are not serious, or, oh no, he's definitely going to do that, you know. Yeah. It's still, there's still this energy, a little less than the past few weeks, but there's still this energy of like a choice not being quite made about like choosing a side. I don't know if you remember that energy, but it still feels like that, even if it's like lesser right now. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Feels like a good time to transition
Yeah.
to the next topic, especially because we talked about Iran. And yeah, we wanted to talk about how the relationships between Iran and Venezuela and the United States, both first country who are very much in deep crisis right now, have been playing out this week by the liberation of several US prisoners, which would be quite surprising, saying that their government is not, and the relationship between the government and their people is not stable at all right now. And like the people are either fleeing these countries or like trying to push back against like things that they don't agree with if they can. So it's interesting that both of them have freed US prisoners. And so I would just like to discuss that with you, because obviously like we know that there's no such thing as coincidence. And so what do you feel is at the core of that?
I think that like it's so interesting that they both did that at the same time. They're countries, and it feels like very similar kinds of situations in a way, because of how they're both dictatorships. They're both part of a pact of between countries that is like, anti-US and anti the West and stuff, and how they're making these like concessions to the US and receiving something, but that haven't been seen in a really long time. Yeah, it's interesting. And in Iran, I think it was that. So there was a father. Well, there were two guys who were imprisoned who were Iranian Americans, and their father and son. And the son was released for a week on like a furlough, like released from prison, but still unable to leave Iran. But he could go see, I believe, his mother in Tehran, and they could be together. And then his father was released from prison to go outside of Iran to get medical treatment, because he had a really big issue with his like brain or the blood vessels up there or something. And so, yeah, it's crazy. They didn't let him leave Iran for medical treatment before. Like he had a similar issue some years ago, and he had to get his like operation done in Iran because they wouldn't let him leave. But I guess it's kind of a bigger concession. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's what I'm wondering about is, or I didn't say it yet, sorry, is like, what are they trying to accomplish? What is the true like truth behind this, and the intention behind them doing that? I wonder if it's because they feel like if they like warm their relations with the US, then their economies can recover, because maybe they can go on a path towards some sanctions being lifted or something. I don't know. Yeah.
So
I know.
I have a bigger question, and my question is, who is actually receiving the concession in the first place? So yes, we have these prisoner swaps, but who's really receiving the concession? And is it really a true concession? Like, what does it give anybody under these circumstances, except more of a door to walk through for negotiation in a space where negotiation hasn't really been the mode of operation before, in a space where there seems to be some background that is unclear. So it's this concept of they were trying to smuggle drugs, and they were these executives of certain companies. And I mean, like the Venezuelan guys were known as the narco twins or whatever, or brothers or something like that. So like it, and then like even with what's her name? What's this woman's name? The Greiner person who was detained in Russia for having brought CBD oil or CBD or hemp oil into the country. I think it was, is she a basketball athlete or something? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's like, it's all of those things, and you have to wonder, what is it actually pointing to? Because with all of those countries, there's one common country. That common country is America. And in all of those instances, rightfully or wrongfully detained is their citizens. But what are they trading away when they start to open the door to have these type of negotiations? Because yes, it might look like a concession, but a concession means you're also trading away stuff. And both sides are trading away stuff. And who is really trading away the bigger, for lack of a better phrasing, bargaining power here?
Well, I don't know exactly who is trading who, who is trading what, whatever. And I think like the media and like right now we've talked about similarities between these countries that have been having prisoner swaps. And right after I said that, I realized that, oh, the United States wasn't the politics about seeming good and protecting the citizens so that the Biden could win the next election. There's a little bit of that, and I think the big winner and the country we should put our focus on is actually the United States, and not what maybe links all of these countries together. And I think to talk about these countries a little bit more, however anti-American they want to seem and how they communicate with their public, they have obviously huge consequences to sanctions, and sanctions on top of a world crisis, economical crisis, and resources crisis. And so what I think is that because they've been backed into a corner, Venezuela, more longer than Iran probably, but still kind of backed into a corner. I think instead of what they're trading away, it's a tool for them to actually, as you said, open negotiations and open conversations and resources for them. And it's okay, we're in a time of deep crisis, and we need this. However, we speak to the people about how we're against the United States. We live in a world where we can't actually separate our economy from anybody. And so what we're doing here is losing these people, because it doesn't really make them lose a whole lot, especially because in terms of image, they don't have much to lose right now, and gain. No, it's real, the people are concentrated on other things and prisoner swaps, actually surviving for some of them, sadly. So it's we still need these avenues to communicate with the world. And if it benefits, I don't think they think about the benefits of the United States, but if it benefits the United States in the terms of all right, we've consolidated our image of we're actually making progress and freeing our citizens and caring about them, then so be it. But yeah, in terms of the game of politics, I think that's how it could be explained. But yeah, I don't know how you guys feel about that, or if you feel that there are other components about all of this.
Mm. Um, what was I feeling about Venezuela and Iran? Yeah, how I was feeling that it feels like I mean, they kind of both regimes, like they kind of have an energy of like avoidance of the crises going on in their countries in terms of like actually changing how they were to treat people, in their country. They're definitely trying to avoid that and just use the same measures that they've always been using to kind of keep, to kind of try to attempt to control people. And they're kind of like instead trying to reach out to the US and kind of like maybe mend relations there to somehow improve conditions in their countries so that general unrest could go down. But that's not really, I don't know, that doesn't seem like a very like short-term strategy. It feels like they need like that strategy they're using is like taking vitamins, and right now they need like the electroshock pads to like revive you. Like they need that kind of help.
That's
Like
funny.
I don't know what that thing is called, but yeah, that thing.
Defibrillator? No, I don't
No,
know.
the
Whatever.
defibrillator. They need defibrillators, and they're reaching for vitamins
Oh my
because
God.
the real defibrillator would be to change how they treated people and everything. But that's a really big transformation there. So
Yeah. So basically,
anyway,
we're saying that they're a person trying to seek solutions outside of themselves
yeah, exactly.
instead of trying to resolve like the internal turmoil. Is that
Yeah,
it?
the core problem. Yeah. So I feel that with them, but then with the United States, I feel like in general, anytime that a US president can like free hostage citizens, it's positive. I feel like with Venezuela, because that's the only country that actually released US prisoners, it's like I think a lot of those people were who were in prison were themselves like Latino, like or of Latin American ancestry, and I think that for Biden and for the Democrats, that like appeals to a huge base for them, and it's worth it because like even though like the senator from Florida, Marco Rubio, who's trying to be like, oh, this is what a weak move because you released some real criminals in exchange for people who were detained for no reason, and this is just going to encourage dictatorships to take more US hostages, which I'm not sure if that's a healthy thing to say because it doesn't really feel very loving to try to not free some people, try to not, you know what I mean, who are like someone who's held like illegitimately by another country. It doesn't really seem loving to not, because it begs the question, well then what are you going to do? Like how would you help these people? So I don't really feel that that's very loving, but it's like the obvious, right? It's like the obvious move that Republicans who are opposing Democrats would like want to say, but I'm like, but I think for Joe Biden, like their administration, he's like, that's worth it, and yeah.
So basically,
anything beyond that.
so basically there's a Black woman and an Iranian American and Latino, like Venezuelan American people, that's it. So
who were like
imprisoned.
Who were imprisoned.
And
Yeah,
then
so
freed.
there were 2 Iranian American people. They're still in the custody of Iran. They weren't released, but temporarily were released for purposes.
Okay. But yeah, it still works, like it still appeals to the POC population of the United States, which is like more present than ever, and is probably about to turn certain states into like switch states or maybe Democrat states if he can win them. So yeah, it was definitely worth it, you know.
Yeah, I'm just wondering though, like beyond that, like little yet I guess valuable political win and the humanitarian desire to like get people out of prison. But I'm just wondering, like, would the US actually like go further and be like easing sanctions on these countries? It's a weird thing to contemplate because I don't feel like they would. I feel like the thing about this is that these regimes are like really almost collapsing in on themselves. And I feel like for anyone like who has an interest in freedom and all that, like why would you like try to mitigate that? Why wouldn't you just let the country collapse, let the regime, collapse in on itself? You know? But like, I don't know. I'm almost saying like if the Venezuelan dictatorship and Iranian dictatorship did that and they were like, hey, let's try to get these sanctions lifted. I'm almost saying like that's almost a vain hope. That's almost a desperate attempt. You know what I mean?
So I don't think in this day and age they can just comfortably say let it collapse. I think there has to still be some level of, even if it's for the hype and the media factor, there has to be some level of engagement. There has to be the appearance of an engagement. So I don't think it's as simple as let it collapse. I'm not certain what the complete gain is just yet, but I'm a little bit on Yurine's page in terms of in the build up to a next election where many people in the US have already started questioning Joe Biden's mental capacity due to his age and all of those other things. It is a good idea to start stacking up the wins. It's really a good idea to start stacking up the wins, even if he's not the next president. It's still a win for the Democratic Party. So I agree, like it's very even. Some of these things are very easy to start to get swing votes in states that were already on the fence. So I think that there's definitely a strategic play at hand, but also at the same time, we need to remember that in a global economy where the US is saying, we won't act decisively to influence the landscape of another country, but we are very vigilant and we will be seen to be in all those places where we need to be. It's very much the show of a powerful political player. So there's the balance of the image at home. We need to stack up the wings, but there's also the worldly image that we set the tone for a very westernized society. And so we do need to get involved in showing that we are in those places, that we are actively working to repatriate our own citizens who have been wrongfully detained. So yeah, I think there's a strong power play, and there's a strong power play. Well, there's a strong power play on an international stage, but there's also a strong power play internally to, and again, Yurine, it's what you said. They're not just looking outside for the answers. They're also doing some stuff internally to fix the problems. So it's a person choosing to as an individual, if we liken it to that, it's an individual choosing to heal on two fronts. So yeah, I think we do need to keep an eye on it because it's going to be interesting in how it plays out. But having said that, I want to say thank you to everybody for the conversation today. We have reached our hour. It was very interesting. I think there's going to be more coming through in these topics over the next few weeks. So we shall see how it plays out. And to everybody that's been following us, thank you. And please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you'll find all our previous conversations. And we will see all of you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.